Hello and welcome to Sci-Fi Mineshaft. In the last episode of Sci-Fi Minecart, I looked at a film that is pretty much the embodiment of so bad it's good. However, this week, in Sci-Fi Mineshaft, we're going to have a look at a film that is just simply so bad, and why it fails to achieve the status of so bad it's good. The film is none other than the atrocious Robot Monster.
Robot Monster is, only in the most charitable sense of the word, a film. This 1953 movie is, as far as I can tell, attempting to be a sci-fi horror film. However, it falls short on all accounts. The film is dull, inconsequential, but most unforgivably, it is utterly boring. This is what distinguishes it so very far from Plan 9 from Outer Space. You see, in my review of Plan 9 from Outer Space, I talked about the prospect of movies that are so bad that they're good, and I pointed out that it's a bit of a contradiction in terms, for a movie that is truly so bad that it is good is in fact good, and therefore cannot be so bad. However, to its credit, Robot Monster completely avoided this paradox by being one of the most unenjoyable movies I've ever sat through. So let's explore why. Well, firstly I charge the film as being inconsequential, and it most certainly is. You see, the entire film, except for the very beginning and very end, is a dream. That's right, it's all a dream, and the movie ends with the main character, or I guess one of the characters, waking up and finding out that it's a dream. It was all a dream is one of the laziest, most unforgivable tropes in movie history, and I'm pretty certain that even in primary school, a child in creative writing class would be flunked and severely beaten for using it. It very rarely ever adds anything to the story, and is completely pointless unless the entire point of the story is to explore someone's subconscious. The only point of ever using an "it was a dream" style of storytelling is to have an identifiable character exist in a totally unrealistic fantasy world. Two examples of this working well, and they are the only examples I can think of that use it well, is in Alice in Wonderland and in The Wizard of Oz. However, in Alice in Wonderland and in The Wizard of Oz, the two characters are aware that something is not right, and while they're not completely certain that they're in a dream world, they're definitely certain that they're not in the reality they're supposed to belong to. Their dream sequence is supposed to be a representation of their subconscious exploration of a problem they're not able to grapple with while conscious. However, in Robot Monster, that is simply not the case. The kid while he's asleep, and the kid while he's awake, are really not very much the same character at all, because while the kid is asleep, he's not aware that he's asleep, and completely believes he's in the dream world, down to the point of him seeming to have a history of being in the dream world, which means he's not really exploring anything, and there's no real point to have him dreaming. If the kid while he's asleep has no connection to the kid while he's awake, then what was the point of making the kid asleep in the first place? You might as well have set the entire thing in the sleep world and made it reality. There's literally no reason that this film should have been in a dream. It's a sci-fi movie. It can get away with having sci-fi elements without explaining them as being a dream. It would be like if George Lucas decided to put a 5-minute prelude and a 5-minute conclusion before and after Star Wars, showing Luke Skywalker go to bed and then get up, and then turning to the camera, looking at it directly and saying, "Oh, I guess it was all a dream." It's completely unnecessary, and it makes the entire adventure of the movie completely and utterly pointless. But okay, let's move on and try to have a look at the actual storyline that happens while he's in the dream world. The first thing you'll probably notice while watching his dream sequence, aka pretty much the entire movie, is that the storyline is pretty much entirely incomprehensible, and all of the characters do stupid things for no particular reason. This would perhaps make sense considering the whole thing is the concussion dream of a young boy, but instead of it being done as a psychedelic dream sequence, which would have made it far more interesting, it's just done as if it's badly written, which is probably because it is in fact just badly written. Anyway, let's get into it. The kid is playing spaceman, and then the writers realize they needed a reason to start the dream sequence. So the kid is told to take a nap, despite the fact he's 12 years old and far too old to be told to take naps. He does so, and there's a weird transition sequence of irrelevant footage of dinosaurs fighting, and we're introduced to the world of Robot Monster, a dystopian future past in which Roman, the Robot Monster, has wiped out all but 8 people in the world, because I'm pretty sure the storyline is that humans were possibly going to become a threat again. So obviously Roman is a pretty dang big threat, and the only reason that the 8 surviving humans have survived this is that a couple of them are on a space station, and that a couple of them are hidden in a small force field in a bombed out building. And on top of this, they've also been given a serum that makes them immune to Roman's death rays, which comes in handy when the death rays are what's killing you. So our character's only possibility of survival is for Roman not to learn about the serum that's made them immune, and for them to stay within the confines of their protective building. Instead, like badly written morons, they're constantly leaving the confines of their protective building, and they tell Roman directly to his face about the bloody serum. Now this could have been done interestingly. For a movie to be of any interest at all, there needs to be conflict. So of course they would have to reveal themselves to Roman at some point, or Roman would have had to find them at some point, otherwise there's no actual movie there. But throughout the film, not once is there a good reason for them to leave. They just leave constantly for moronic reasons, as if they've forgotten it's the apocalypse. They're not doing something that would make sense, like scavenging for food because they ran out of supplies. They're just doing ludicrously stupid stuff like wandering off. Speaking of this, despite the parents telling us that one word said outside the barrier will bring Roman upon them, they manage to consistently lose track of their kids during the apocalypse, risking the entire survival of the human race. Now that is bad parenting. Okay, let's move on to the love plot. Johnny, who is the kid, meets a young scientist and an old scientist in a cave. And in the dream world, he imagines the old scientist to be his father, alongside his mother, who is his mother in real life. As for the younger scientist, Johnny shoehorns him into a bad romantic story along with his older sister. We see them briefly engage in some charming 1950s sexism before they fall in love. Roman then develops a fetish for the older sister. He asks to meet with the older sister. The family refuses to allow Alice, who is the older sister, to meet with Roman, and they decide to tie her up for her own protection. While they're busy doing this, they lose sight of Johnny, who once again runs away, because they're bad parents, and he is the stupid, poorly written child. It is during this running away that Johnny decides to spill the beans and tell Roman how the humans have been surviving. It is incredible that even in his own dream, Johnny is just an unmitigated disaster. Once they finally realize that Johnny's gone missing, the young scientist and Alice go out looking for him, which is obviously stupid because they had just finished tying up Alice for the express purpose of preventing her from leaving the barricade, and it also begs to question why they didn't tie up Johnny after the first time he ran out of the barricade. But whatever. While Alice and the scientists are off looking for Johnny, they have a close encounter with Roman and hide in a bush. Johnny makes it home, and his father fires up a flare to indicate that Johnny's home safe, which is obviously stupid and makes no sense because the flare is fired from the place that they're trying to hide from Roman, and the flare can be seen from everywhere because it's a flare, which basically indicates that that's where they are, but for some reason Roman doesn't find them because of the flare, because the story is badly written. But I digress. While hiding in the bush in the middle of an apocalyptic wasteland while being stalked by Roman, the destroyer of humanity, Alice and the young scientist decide it's the perfect time to get their bone on. Now, remember, this is all in the dream of Johnny, so it is in fact not Alice and the scientist getting their bone on, but Johnny dreaming about Alice, his older sister, and the scientist getting their bone on. That's some next level Luke Claire Game of Thrones shit going on down there. Moving on from Sigmund Freud's favourite scene, Alice and the young scientist get home and they decide to get married because it's the apocalypse, so why not? I actually had no problem with them deciding to get married. I think humanity finding love in the middle of calamity and deciding to acknowledge the love in the midst of horror is a beautiful thing, and it can be done fantastically when it's done well. For example, like it was in Independence Day. However, what follows is stupidity that boggles the mind and dwarfs any of the other stupidity already found in this stupid film. Having got married, they decide to go on a honeymoon. During the apocalypse. On a honeymoon, outside of the barrier, protecting them from being detected. Why? Why would anyone in their right mind decide to do that? It makes no logical sense. It's literally the most ludicrously stupid thing anyone can do during an apocalypse. Hey, we just got married. Let's go outside the barrier, stopping us from being dead. But it gets even stupider. The lovely, highly intelligent, married couple consisting of two scientists saunter out into a field where they're perfectly visible for all to see. The little girl, who is Johnny's younger sister, also wanders out to say hello to them and see them off. This means that once again the parents weren't paying close attention to their children, and once again one of their kids was able to wander off unsupervised into the apocalypse. Then, the two highly intelligent scientists tell the kid to go home and just send her off home in the apocalypse without escorting her themselves. Now, I know this film is from the 50s and parents weren't that protective back then, but this is not a cul-de-sac, this is the apocalypse! You can't just send a kid home during the apocalypse while you know that robot monsters are storming around killing people. It's a bad idea. And it was a bad idea because Roman finds the kid and makes her dead. However, unaware of this recent, and I remind you, wholly imagined tragedy, because it's entirely a dream sequence, so who really cares that the kid is dead? But while this wholly inconsequential tragedy is taking place, the newly married couple get back to macking. But suddenly, oh my lord, Roman has found them and he's carrying the girl off. Who could have foreseen that making out in the middle of an apocalyptic wasteland could have ended badly? Well, anyone with half a brain. Roman then tries to rape the recently kidnapped older sister, which once again makes me call into question the psychological stability of Johnny, who is, once more I remind you, dreaming all this, but then is interrupted by one of his commanders who calls him on the creepy fetish he's developed for the species that he's supposed to be wiping out. Roman is then lured out of the cave by the family who's attempting to rescue Alice. Having been lured out, he finds Johnny and tries to kill him, but then one of Roman's commanders ends the world and the dream ends, pointing out just how inconsequential the entire film is, and I'm pretty certain highlighting the fact that the only reason it's a dream sequence is because they didn't know how to end the movie. So, that's pretty much the entire plot of the terrible film that is Robot Monster. But the film's sins do not end there, and perhaps the greatest sin of this movie is that it's just so damn boring. The pacing of the film is slower than you could possibly imagine, and there's not a single enjoyable bone in the entire film's body. You see, in films like Plan 9 from Outer Space, the movie realizes it's ridiculous, and the mood of the film reflects it, and because the mood of the film is also ridiculous, the film is actually enjoyable because the whole thing is basically a parody of itself. Robot Monster, however, has a dark and depressing mood that goes throughout the entire film that the movie has no business of trying to even attempt. Containing scenes where the parents talk about killing themselves and the children to prevent them from having to deal with the horror that is the apocalypse, and having scenes where a mother cries over her dead daughter, this film is downright depressing. And combine that depressing mood with the slow pacing of the film, there's not really a single highlight in the entire film except for when the credits come up indicating that it's over. Therefore, you can't enjoy this movie as a serious sci-fi film because the plot of the film is so ridiculous that there's absolutely no way that it can be taken seriously. However, on the other hand, it can't be enjoyed as an over-the-top B-grade sci-fi film because it's so depressing and moody, which leaves the film with nothing. Overall, Robot Monster is a depressingly terrible sci-fi film with absolutely no redeeming qualities. Oh, and I forgot to mention, during the first half of the film, there's a loud buzzing that hurt my ears and gave me a headache, so it's got that going for it. Usually I end these videos by suggesting you watch the film yourself and make your own decision, but honestly I can't do that in this video. I would be shocked if anyone could possibly enjoy this movie, so watch it if you're a masochist, if not, steer very clear.
Thanks for watching. I have been and still am Grim Grindle.